Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today we are going over my top 5 most aggravating ships to play against list. These are 5 ships that I absolutely do not want to see on the enemy team, and if they are on the enemy team, I do not want to see them on my flank, because I know that it's probably going to be a pretty miserable time trying to deal with these ships, because they have some, shall we say, very interesting characteristics about them. Before we get into the video, just want to remind you guys that this is 105% my opinion, and that you can disagree with me if you want to. I would expect many of you will, because we're not all the same, and if we were all the same and had the same opinions and everything, the world would be a very boring place. And if you do disagree with me, let me know in the comments section, and while you're down there, also make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. We have to appease the algorithm gods, and hitting the like button and commenting certainly helps that, so make sure you guys do that while you're down there in the comment section. So without any further delay, let's just go ahead and get on into it, shall we? Coming in at number 5 is the one and the only tier 10 premium battleship, the Thunderer. And yes, there is the incomparable, and she is classified as a battleship in game, but she's really a battle cruiser, so technically this is the only tier 10 premium British battleship at tier 10, at the moment at least. So, the Thunderer. I have been a long time commentator on the Thunderer, and you might be thinking, Sealord, this ship is always showing up in your top 5 videos. Yes, it is, because it is that good. This thing was outright broken for a very long time, in my opinion, and they have nerfed her in a pretty clever way. What they did was they toned down her range, where you essentially have to take the range mod or the reload mod in her last slot, depending upon what you want. If you want a 24-kilometer range on your Thunderer, you have to take the range mod. You want that nice lower half 20-second reload time, you have to take the reload mod now. And with how nutty this ship is, she's still perfectly fine in my opinion. I, however, do disagree with them nerfing her after they removed her. That was kind of dumb. They announced that she was being removed, which meant that, of course, everyone and their mom was grinding out the coal to get the Thunderer, got the Thunderer, and then they nerfed her after her removal. Again, I thought she needed to be nerfed. I think it's dumb that they removed her, then nerfed her. But anyway, still today, Thunderer, she's still really popular. Rarely more than a game or two goes by at tier 10 and there's not a Thunderer on the enemy team. And for those of you that don't know, what makes the Thunderer so darn annoying to play against is that it is so hard to mitigate the damage that this ship can throw out there. With most battleships, they have one or two good things about their guns that makes them usable. They either have something like a good reload time, like the Preußen and the Republic. They have good accuracy, like the Thunderer. I'm sorry, not like the Thunderer, but like the Yamato and the Slava. Or they have a large number of decently accurate guns, like the Montana, or leaning more into the larger number side, the Colombo. Or they might have a good shell that has some benefits, or well, some large benefits over similar shell types at that tier. So like the American battleships, again, the Montana, she has the Mark 8 super heavy AP shell. That's a 16-inch shell that is super heavy. It's really dense. If you want to read into the history of the shell, it's actually pretty interesting what they did in real life to get the performance out of that shell. So even though she has 16-inch guns, they really hit like 17-inch guns because of that shell. Or they have short fuse AP like the British battleships do. Or if you're the Thunderer, you just have it all. So the Thunderer's guns, first off, like I said, if you take the reload module, your reload time will be in the lower 20s with the reload module. Second off, she has amazing accuracy with these guns. A lot of dual gun battleships, so battleships that have 2 guns per turret, there's something in this game that just, I don't know what it is with the dual gun battleships. Their guns seem to be a little wonky. Thunder doesn't really seem to suffer from that too much. So her guns are accurate, they have a good reload time, and she has amazing AP. She has 18-inch guns, 457mm guns with normal battleship AP. She doesn't get the short fuse British BB AP. So that means these 18-inch guns hit hard, and again, the guns are accurate, and they have a fast reload time. Even with the range mod, you still have, again, a reload in the 20s with the range mod on. Keep that in mind. So you're thinking, okay, so she's an AP sniper. Well, that's when, surprise, she still has amazing British BB HE. You can build into the HE on this thing, and you'll have like a 60, I believe a 67% chance of starting a fire per shell. Now, again, that's building into it with commander skills and flags and such, but that's a little nutty for guns that, again, can reload in the lower 20s if you take the mod on it, and that are crazy accurate. So this means that if you're on the receiving end of a Thunderer, you have two options. Well, you probably have 3 or 4 options, but there's really only one that works. If they're firing AP at you, you go, haha, okay, since you have 457s and not 460s, you can't overmatch my 32mm bow, so I'm just going to bow into you or stun into you and angle. That way you can't overmatch my armor, and you'll just bounce or shatter your shells or just get some overpins on my superstructure. The Thunderer just yawns and hits the 1 key and loads up that HE. And since, again, she has a low 20s reload time with the mod, or again a 24km range, she's going to be roasting you down pretty fast with the HE. So then you think, oh god, well, okay, he's spamming HE. Let me just go ahead and get all my guns on target and just see if I can, maybe get him down before he burns me down. And that's when they just, hit 2, load AP again, and Citadel you for half of your health in a single salvo. And that's just the guns. We haven't gotten to the rest of the ship yet either. This is a British battleship, so she does have, for some reason, amazing stealth. This massive battleship can get down to, I believe, a 12.7km concealment, and she also has cruiser maneuverability. The Thunderer has the Conqueror's legendary mod built into it, so she has a 10-second rudder shift time on a battleship. Not to mention, the Thunderer was before Wargaming made the decision that if they're going to give a battleship amazing artillery, they were going to make the bow and stern overmatchable by pretty much every other battleship at that tier, a la the Slava. So she has a 32mm bow and stern, which means that, again, unless you're in the Yami, Musashi, or one of the other 18-inch and above battleships, you can't overmatch it. Now, yes, it is the Conqueror's armor scheme, and it isn't the toughest battleship, but she still has more than enough armor to withstand. And you can see in the gameplay footage in the background, I'm being focused down because, well, I'm in a Thunderer, and I survive and do fine. Even though, again, the argument back in the day is that the Thunderer was weakly armored was there. And again, she still gets an improved heal. It's not the Conqueror Drydock heal. It's more along the lines of the Warspite heal. But yeah, so even if you could manage to punch this thing a couple times in the face, it would just disengage. Because again, she has a 12.7km concealment. She has no need to get close into you because she has decent range. And heal up and show back up and get back to roasting you down or citadeling you to death with her amazing AP. But again, they have nerfed her in a pretty clever way now. I do think that the nerf is better for the game's overall balance. Again, it is dumb in my opinion that they nerfed her after being removed. But still a ship I do not want to see on the enemy team because I know it's going to be a lot of suffering to get through that ship. So, yeah. Moving on down to number 4. We have, well, kind of a whole class of ships here, but the ship I chose to represent this type of ship is the Tier 10 Soviet light cruiser, the Smolensk. So, the ship class that I really want to put here would be the kind of hyper light cruisers. You guys know what I mean, like the cruisers that are very thinly armored, and on paper you think, okay, it's got no armor, you just shoot at it and it should explode. Ships like the Smolensk, the Colbert, well, the Colbert does actually explode when you shoot at the Worcester. These hyper light cruisers that have so little armor, it's actually better than having armor. I'm sure most of you guys have been there. This ship is either in smoke or behind an island. It sits there, it HE spams you for ages. You finally catch it broadside because you've been pushing the island or pushing the smoke. You let your main battery guns rip, and you do like 5,000 damage and overpins because it has so little armor that your shells just go right through it. It has to be one of the most frustrating things you can do as a battleship player. Because, again, you've probably been pushing their smoke or pushing their position, just eating their HE spam, eating the fires, tanking all this damage that they're doing to you. And they've farmed you for like 20 or 30k, and finally it's time to rain justice down upon them, and you barely scratch their paint. It is super frustrating, and we have seen an increase in this as the game has gone on with age. Thankfully, with the Commander rework and some of the changes that they've been doing globally, things like 19-kilometer Smolensk, and the real crazy days of HE spam has kind of been toned down a little bit. But of course, if these ships get into a good position, they're still going to do the same thing to you, and it's there's no end to that type of frustration here. If you want a tip when dealing with these ships, especially if you have a battleship with large caliber guns for its tier, you want to actually not aim at the armor on this ship. You actually want to aim a little bit below the water, especially at close range, because at close range your shells are traveling so fast. So aim at the water. In this game, the shells are still modeled once they hit the water. Your shells will hit the water, slow down, and then it'll actually penetrate that ship's armor. You can also deal with these ships if you have something like a Stalingrad with its short fuse AP, because the Stalingrad, even though it has godly velocity on its guns, and they are large guns for a cruiser because they're Soviet bias shells, they get that short fuse time, which essentially gives it like, it's kind of like sap, if you will, but it's sap with a bite. So you'll pin the armor, but because of the short fuse, the shells will detonate inside the ship and actually do damage to it. Or if you're in the British battleships with their short fuse AP, same thing can happen there. Another thing you can do is try to hit these ships when they're angled to you, when they're either trying to run away or if they're bow into you and they're turning. You can catch them at an angle. That'll actually give your shells enough time to arm inside the ships before they pass on through. So yeah, again, a type of ship that most of us battleship players have had to deal with time and time again, that's exceptionally frustrating to try and deal with. And the thing is, at least these ships do have a citadel, so when you do finally find them with their pants down or at the proper angle, you get your shells to bite, you can citadel them off the face of the map. Our next contender doesn't have that. So going on down to number 3, we have the tier 10 Japanese destroyer, the Harugumo. Now, the Harugumo and the Kitakaze too. You can throw the Kitakaze in here with the Harugumo because they're both exceptionally annoying to deal with. And the Kitakaze, I probably could have put the Kitakaze here now that I'm thinking about it, because the Harugumo, you don't really see the Harugumo too much more at tier 10, even though she still has amazing DPM. It's just that we've somehow gotten even better gunboats at tier 10 than the Harugumo, although the Harugumo, as you'll see in the gameplay footage in the background, man, when this thing gets into position with its smoke and its high number of guns and its fast reload on these guns, this thing can absolutely just vomit shells downrange. And the Kitakaze is, of course, the same thing, except the Kitakaze is just kind of cracked for where it's at in the tech tree for being the tier 9. But yeah, unlike the Smolensk and the Colbert and the Worcester and all these other HE spammy ships now that we have in the cruiser slot, these guys don't have citadels. Now, thankfully the Harugumo is a big target, so you'll probably be able to hit it a little bit easier than some other DDs, but she still has a fair amount of HP as well. And also, a couple of months ago, I think it was about a year ago, they gave the Harugumo the appropriate pin rate for Battleship AP versus her. If you guys didn't know, back in the day when they swapped around the maximum AP damage that was allowed to be transferred from a battleship shell to a DD, it went from I think 33% down to 10%, except for the Khabarovsk and the Harugumo. Those two DDs, since they were so large and had much larger than average HP pools for their tier, it was ruled that those guys would get stuck with that 33% pin rate, which obviously sucked for those destroyers. But a long while ago, that was undone, and now they both only take 10% maximum AP damage from battleship caliber AP. So it's much more comfortable to play the Khabarovsk and the Harugumo in today's World Warships than it was 1 or 2 years ago. And the Harugumo still works quite well from my experience. Again, just vomiting HE, you have smoke that you can sit in, it lasts plenty enough time to get quite a few shells downrange on whatever ship it is that you are deciding to make cry for that day. Not to mention, too, she still has torpedoes, and they are pretty good torpedoes, and they do get the torpedo reload booster consumable, where you get a 5-second reload on your torp. So you can throw 1 rack of torps down. You do have a long torpedo reload time, however, but then you pop the reload booster, and there you go. You're ready to go again in 5 seconds. And yeah, needless to say, that's pretty rough for a ship that decides to, put their big boy pants on and rush your smoke screen. And I've melted down so many heavy cruisers and light cruisers in this thing that they got brave. They decided they were going to push the smoke, and either I had some spotting them or whatever, and I was able to just melt them down as they were trying to get into either get me into the hydro range of their hydro or into my smoke firing penalty range. This ship is nuts. Again, not as popular as it used to be because we've had some more comfortable ships to play. I don't think there's too many ships that have surpassed the pure raw DPM of this thing at tier 10, but definitely a ship that's super frustrating to play against. Alright, going on down to number 2, we of course have what used to be everybody's most hated class, that is CVs. Now, CVs are, they are very frustrating to play against. They are at least trying to handle up on some of that with the proposed changes to the AA rework, shall we say, where now, instead of having your squadron just get completely refilled by your reserves, you actually are committed with the squadron that you dive down with. For example, if you watch the gameplay footage in the background, the way the current CV mechanics work is that, as you see, when I launch my planes, I have this huge flight of planes that come out with me, and you'll see there's bars at the bottom of the screen. Each of those bars is an attacking flight, and if you'll see when I dive down on a ship to attack them, there's, I believe, depending upon the squadron, 3 to 4 planes that are part of that attack wave. And when one of those planes gets destroyed, it simply gets refilled by planes from the reserve. Now, that means that if you are the ship that's trying to defend themselves from the CV, if you're having to deal with, let's say, the Malta here, and I'm not sure how many planes are in the Malta's attacking flights, but let's say there's 15 planes. But the attacking wave only has 4 planes. You have to chew through 9 planes before you actually start to take away any of the ordnance being thrown at you. Now, the idea is that as the match progresses, and the CV keeps attacking various ships as the match goes on, they will lose planes, and then eventually their carrier's ability to print new planes will be overtaken by their losses, and they won't be able to launch full squadrons anymore. In reality, with the current mechanics that are in place, and if you're a decent enough CV player or have a busted ship like the Malta that whose plane regen rate can simply keep up with the losses, it doesn't really affect you too much, because all you need is those 3 or 4 planes to get through every flight so you get your attacks runs off. Now, in the new system, they're proposing that you have to be locked in with those squadrons once you go in for the attacks. Like when you click left mouse to begin the attack, you're stuck with those 3 or 4 planes in that squadron. If you lose those planes, that's it. But that's not here yet. We're having to deal with the current system where it doesn't matter if you don't shoot down the whole squadron, you're not able to defend yourself. And of course, with the way that AA works, your AA is being fired by bots, and most of the flak damage that your guns do are bot controlled. Well, not most, all of that is controlled by bots, yet the planes are controlled by players, so they can, fake out the AI, dodge the flak quite easily, especially if they get good at it, and it feels like a lot of times your AA simply does nothing, and you're at the mercy of the CV player. AA really only seems effective when you have at least 3 or 4 ships sitting on top of each other. And even then, sometimes, a lot of times, the CV player still gets through no problem. And needless to say, of course, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the attacks and damage that these CVs can get off are quite devastating to your health, especially if it's coming from something like a Malta or a Nakhimov. But there is one class that has risen up and has managed to take some of the heat off of the CV players. And that is everybody's favorite new class, submarines, who also occupy our number 1 slot. Yes, subs are here, they're released in full, and submarines have to be one of the most inconsistent ships for me, at least in terms of annoyance. Because they're either not an issue, the submarine player dies in like 2 minutes, or the guy's a legend at submarines and he kills half your team. It feels like we're pre-CV rework CVs where you had the CV players that had no clue what they were doing. They could barely even launch planes. And then you had the CV players that would kill half of the enemy team before the friendly team even got within firing range. That's what it feels like right now with submarines. They're either a non-problem or the biggest headache of the entire match. And that has to do a lot with how you play submarines. That they're very good at dealing with ships that are alone and by themselves. If you're with 2 or 3 other ships, it's probably not going to be a good situation with the submarine, and those submarine players that are good at finding those isolated targets or isolating a target by themselves, and it's just a frustrating endeavor to try and deal with a submarine. You have to try and figure out where he's at, and yes, we do have the hydrophone effect, we do have the pings, we do have the oil spills now, but again, if a submarine player knows what they're doing and knows how to minimize all that, it's very frustrating to try and deal with this sub. Not to mention, too, you pretty much have to drop everything that you're doing to try and counter them, especially if they get a double ping on you with their homing torpedoes. Yes, homing torpedoes, if you haven't been playing this game for a while, those are a thing in game now. And, yeah, not to mention other things, too, like shotgunning, how shotgunning is an issue that hasn't really been addressed with just yet. For my personal experience, I will say shotgunning hasn't really been used on me too much. I think at least 4 or 5 times since the subs have been fully released, it has happened to me. Again, not too much, but again, playing a battleship, battleships typically are in like the middle of the fleet or toward the rear, especially if you play something like a Yamato, and submarines don't really have the time with how fast some of these matches are going to get to battleships. But playing submarines, I have pulled it off quite a few times, as I'm sure those of you that have been watching the channel for some time have seen, especially with like the I-56 here. So yeah, they're a big headache. It's a new class, and they have said, the devs have said, that they're not really making much changes to them for, I think, the next patch or 2. So we'll see what happens with these guys in the future, but they are absolutely one of the most annoying classes to deal with when they decide that you are their prey for today. So guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Almost didn't make through that sentence right there. If you enjoyed the video, again, guys, please make sure to drop a like and leave a comment on this video. It helps out a lot with the algorithm, which unfortunately YouTube today, it's like dealing with that is 80% of doing YouTube, sadly, but it is what it is. Again, guys, hope you guys have a wonderful Monday. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.